That's what I'm here for. We all like to talk about relationships, right?
Believe me, I need all the help I can get.
There's the element of having a fantasy relationship in our head. So we're not in the reality of the relationship.
Right.
We're in the fantasy of what we think that we want. Our attachment style often reveals itself when we are having relational distress. I can tell when I meet someone if they are avoidant, and they may not even have to speak.
What should I be asking?
Yeah, I think questions like, when we are anxious, when we are avoidant, our nervous system is activated.
Right.
We're either hyper or hypo. We're in this survival mode.
What is love?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I would say
Hello, and welcome to the second in our series of podcasts, The No Filter Zone. I'm Deborah Aharoni, and today I am both delighted and excited to welcome our special guest for today. Her name is Charisse Cooke. She's a therapist, a psychotherapist, a relationship expert, an author, an influencer, and she's been in a relationship for the last 14 years, so she knows a thing or two about them. Hello, Charisse, and thank
Hi.
you so much for being here today.
it's
How are
a
you?
real pleasure. I'm good, thank you. I'm very good.
Excellent. Oh, so I don't even know where to start. I'm just going to pick your brain about everything, so I hope you don't mind.
That's what I'm here for. We all like to talk about relationships, so let's do it. And we need
Oh.
all the help we can get,
Oh,
right?
well,
I know, right?
Believe me, I need all the help I can get. Yes, definitely. So how did you get into it?
I studied psychology at university when I was just a young little 18-year-old because I've always been interested in psychology and people. And then I came to this country because I studied in South Africa. And when I came to this country, I started doing volunteer work with people with disabilities and kind of stuff like that. And then I actually had a boyfriend who worked in a rehab, so worked with people with addiction issues.
Wow.
And he volunteered, and I was always quite jealous of his job. And he had to leave because he was doing something else. And I said, "Tell them you've got a replacement. You know, volunteer. I will volunteer. I would love to do it." And that's exactly what I did. I went in as a volunteer working at this rehab, and I suddenly realized I really loved it. And they were very kind with me, and they said, "We love you, and we'll pay for you to do your masters and learn more, and you know, we're gonna train you up." And what I discovered when I was there was that I was very, very interested in sex and love addiction. Because that was quite a new idea back then. This is going back like nearly 20 years
What?
now.
Wow.
And so, so I was always talking to all the patients, as we called them. I was talking to them about their relationships, because when we have addiction issues, we have relationship issues, right? We've got love addiction, we're codependent, we have a bit of a dysfunctional relationship way of having relationships. And then that just kind of snowballed in a way. I started talking about relationships. I started working with families. I started working with couples. I then went on and worked at another treatment center, and then went to private practice. And then after a period of time, I was just purely working with relationships because I loved it. And
we need it.
And there's no shortage of people who need the help. Absolutely. So yeah.
Wow, that's absolutely fascinating. So what's a love addiction? I've heard of sex addiction.
Right.
It's kind of
yeah.
self-explanatory, but what's the love addiction?
Love addiction is when we're in love with the idea of being in love.
Okay.
So we really like that first initial heady, exciting, if you think about the drug aspect to it, that's
Right.
addictive. The beginning part of a relationship is very addictive. And a lot of stuff is happening in our brain chemistry then that's really going to impact how we relate and why. And then that wears off after a period of time. And then we think we're falling out of love with people. And so then we end the relationship. But actually we can be a little bit of a love addict there, because we're wanting that rush of that initial excitement. But it also encompasses being codependent. It encompasses being too much in a relationship, over-functioning, sacrificing oneself too much. When that becomes really destructive to oneself, that's when we could classify it as a bit of an addictive process, and something that we can't also seem to stop, something that we keep doing.
Okay, so like
And
a
it's a bit of-
vicious
That's right,
cycle.
a vicious cycle, or even a compulsion. So it is a fascinating subject. I think there are a lot of people out there who have elements of love addiction who wouldn't necessarily realize it.
Maybe those people who go from one relationship to the next
Yeah, I would definitely say
continually.
that those are maybe a little love addict for sure.
Or can't be in their own for
That's right.
5 minutes at a time.
That's exactly right. There's this sort of sense of needing other people. And then without that, we feel very lost and empty. So we'll often be in relationships with people we maybe don't even like. We'll have sex with people we don't even want to have sex with because we need people. Wow. We're so scared of being alone. And a really fascinating part of love addiction actually is fantasy. So there's
in what way?
There's the element of having a fantasy relationship in our head. So we're not in the reality of the relationship. Right. We're in the fantasy of what we think that we want. And so I will be working with people, and they'll have been in this long-term relationship, and then it will end. And when we explore what's gone on, we'll realize you were not in the reality of this relationship. You thought that, he was amazing or she was amazing and they were perfect and your relationship was perfect and it was all going to be fine. And you were ignoring all of the very important stuff that you needed to see, all of the red flags, all of the difficulty was just being minimized because we had to hold on to the fantasy in our heads. So fantasy is a very interesting part of love addiction.
I feel like I need to try a bit more of that in my relationships.
To have more fantasy and more idealizing. Yeah. That's true as well, because we can also be very negative in our relationships, can't we?
That's true.
Yeah,
very
that's true.
And you mentioned about brain chemistry. What's going on in our brains when we...
Oh my God. I mean, there are hormones being released in the brain when we meet someone and we get really excited and there's this attraction and there's this chemistry. That's something that we therapists actually warn people about a little bit.
Really?
A lot of people say there's got to be that chemistry and there's got to be that fire. And I suppose it is quite interesting and exciting, but it is also not real. And it is also something that we can get a bit addicted to. And it can also then make us make decisions in our lives when we're in an altered state. So the hormones in our brain, they affect our chemistry, they affect how we think. And that's when in relationships, and this can last up to 2 years. And a lot of people get engaged in 2 years. They really move in within 2 years. A lot of decisions get made in the beginning phase of a relationship when we are in this altered mental state. And it isn't really our healthiest way of making decisions and moving relationships forward, because we're not in our calm, problem-solving, rational minds. We're in highly emotive, drugged brains. I mean, it's similar it's similar to heroin, it's similar to cocaine. The hormones that are released are very similar. So it's very serious.
So no wonder people get addicted.
For sure.
If it's like heroin and coke. I mean,
for sure. That's right. So yeah, people can get addicted to that, or they can just get themselves into situations and into relationships that they sort of surface from kind of years later and are a bit like, how did I get myself here? And it was like, well, you were making decisions that weren't about your best interests. They were possibly about a fantasy, or you hadn't really been thinking properly about who this person is, or giving this, the situation time to calm down and just be more in the calm reality of a life together, as opposed to that really heady, exciting time at the beginning, which we all kind of want to live forever, but it doesn't. It fades, and then we're left with more of the reality of what life will be like with each other. And that's when we're like, I don't even like you, or I don't know who you are, or we want very different things from life. And now we're in quite an established long-term relationship, and that can make things very difficult.
So in other words, it's just a mess.
Well, yeah,
relationship feels a mess.
I mean, I do say that, we're in a relationship kind of crisis in our world today, because there is a lot of stuff that's going wrong. How we meet people, how we have relationships, the kind of relationships that people are wanting now. On the one hand, there's this really empowered, exciting, throw convention out the window opportunity within our relationships, which I think is very exciting and very progressive and what we want. But then on the other hand, we don't have the tools, we don't have the knowledge to really support ourselves within these relationships. And people are missing out on things, whether it's wanting to have families or have long-term relationships, or actually be more liberated and explore other things. We're just in a very interesting time in the world when it comes to relationships right now. And we're all, I think, a bit confused and scared and And we're making a lot of mistakes, which is okay. But, when we're dealing with other people, that means people get hurt and then we get wounded and traumatized. And that's what I'm working with my clients all the time, is often the impact of our relationships on us. We become jaded, we become hurt, we get traumatized by our relationships. And that affects attachment, that affects how we relate. And, our attachment styles and ways of relating can change and morph over time as a result.
So how should we be entering into relationships if what we're doing now isn't working, which it clearly isn't for a lot of people, myself included?
For sure. I think we just need to know ourselves a lot better. There's a lack of self-awareness in this world. Even though we, in some ways, I guess we're very self-aware or maybe very, very self-conscious, there's still a real lack of knowing ourselves and knowing why we're doing what we are doing. And when I'm working with clients, the first thing that we have to work on is, why is this happening? Why is this familiar? Why do you keep choosing this? Why do you keep attracting these people? Why are these people attracted to you? And that's not to sort of shame us or blame us, but it's just about us to reflect a little bit on what is going on. And that's what I love about attachment theory. It's really relevant now more than ever, because it really sheds so much light on this is why certain relationships are hard for me. And this is also what trips me up in relationships over and over again. And these are the behaviors that I keep doing because this is my relating style. And I need to think about this relating style. And does it need to maybe change so I can be healthier and make better choices for myself?
So when you talk about attachment styles, can you just explain what that means?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There are four attachment styles. The first one is secure. And that's when we feel very, very secure within ourselves and are able to relate to other people with a healthy self-esteem. We believe we are lovable. We believe we are worthy of love. We want relationships. We find talking and communication relatively easy. And we're kind of, this is the best case scenario. We all want to be secure, right? And the other kind is called anxious attachment. And that's when, as the name suggests, we are feeling anxious in relationships. Relationships are a source of stress for us. We don't get our needs met. We want more from our partners. We often feel very dissatisfied in our relationships. And we often overfunction. We do too much in relationships, trying to get more from other people.
Like that.
Right. So we're the doers. We're the doers and we're the feelers. We also feel all the emotion. So and then that just of course increases the anxiety and stress that we experience in relationships. Okay. And then there's avoidance, and there are two kinds of avoidant attachment. There's dismissive avoidant, whereby we can be a bit dismissive of our partners, where we can put them down, we can be rude, we can say unkind things. We're being dismissive. And the purpose of that is to create some distance in the relationship, because when we are avoidant, we need space in a relationship. The intensity of intimate relationships can feel very, very overwhelming for us when we are avoidantly attached. So we're always needing to create just a little bit more space, and we can do that by being a bit dismissive, a bit haughty, a bit rude, and that keeps people away, and that's how we prefer it. So that's one kind of avoidance. And then there's another avoidance that's called fearful avoidance, which is interesting. It's a sort of a mixture of the anxious and the avoidance. So on the one hand, there's this detachment and needing space and feeling a bit unsure about relationships, but then there's also this anxiety coming in. So, the dismissive avoidant isn't very anxious. They're low anxiety. They're a bit like,
back off.
I'm fine. You're not fine.
You're not back away from
is
me.
Kind of the message. But the fearful avoidant is kind of, I'm not fine. This is really scary. I feel overwhelmed by relationships. And this is when fearful avoidance is where addictive relationships do take place. Okay. And so they're dramatic highs and lows, makeups and breakups. And it's sort of quite chaotic, painful, traumatizing relationships. It's an extremely high anxiety way of relating, which is interesting because it's part of avoidance. But wow. And then you've got all the different, this is on a continuum. So it's all from, mild, moderate to extreme. Right. All of those can exist. But something that's really interesting about attachment theory that people don't always recognize is that our attachment style often reveals itself when we are having relational distress.
Okay.
So we can be going about our lives and being quite secure and happy and everything else. And relationships are not a source of stress or pain. But if we're in conflict with our partner, or a family member does something that we don't like, or we feel hurt, or we get angry, or there's some big, issue within a relationship that you're trying to navigate around money or family or whatever it might be, that is when our insecure relating styles can sort of kick into action, because they're sort of like coping strategies. The anxious people get anxious as a way of coping and want closeness, and the avoidant people get a bit overwhelmed and need space. Those are ways of coping.
Of course.
So I think it's useful to reflect on attachment styles, that it's when we're under stress. When we were babies, it was when we were stressed and we needed something from our caregivers. That was when we sort of really needed our needs to be met, not when we were napping and feeling fine, if you see what I mean. So that's just a really interesting. So that's attachment in a very simplified way.
So you just mentioned about baby. So how much do your attachment styles depend on your childhood and upbringing?
I mean, huge. That's, attachment begins in conception. Attachment researchers would say about the level of anxiety that the person carrying the child will be experiencing in the environment. The fetus is able to take all that information from the beginning and then through birth. So it's definitely about how consistent and careful and calm the care was that we all received while we were growing up. But it's also about life. We're always learning. As humans, we're always learning. We're animals. We're always assessing the safety in the world, the threat, how much love there is, how much love there isn't. So we can have, negative experiences in adolescence. We can have terrible relationships in our 20s, 30s, 40s and beyond. All of that's going to impact our relational blueprint, if you like, which is how we view others and relationships. But certainly our young childhood years, our formative years, those are really, really key, because they will set us up on a certain trajectory. But even if we are able to be really secure when we're young and have, good parenting and good enough parenting, as we say, we can have some negative relationships in our life. And then that will change, our ability to trust, our ability to feel safe, our ability to be ourselves. Relationships impact us in that way. So that's what I'm saying about it's really important how we treat each other in this world, because we can be very offhand, and with dating apps and stuff like that, it's almost like a disposable nature to humans and relationships,
100%.
right? That's coming through. That's not healthy for anyone.
No.
No.
Least of all us poor single people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And people in relationships who are very unhappy in relationships and don't know what to do. It's really, that's what I'm saying. It's sort of people who have, really long-term, good, happy, stable relationships of any description. They are the rarity. They're not the majority. From my perspective as a therapist.
Yeah. I mean, talking about that, it's quite funny. It's my parents' 55th wedding anniversary today. Shout out to mum and dad.
Yay, well done.
Happy anniversary. And they're just phenomenal together.
Yeah.
Because it's love, but it's realistic love. So I think in the beginning it was, I think my dad was blown away when he first saw my mum. I don't think he's ever got over that. But then obviously to be together 55 years, it's got to be a lot to do with navigating reality and navigating problems.
Yes, absolutely right.
And conflict analysis. And
yes, that's right.
And obviously my dad realising that my mum was always right. Once he got that into his head, it was smooth sailing.
There we go. So. Well, yeah, I mean, these kind of long-term relationships are really aspirational. But there's also something interesting. If we were to ask your parents, what do they expect from each other? What do they, how do they view their relationship? It would probably be quite different to someone in our modern world today of any age.
Really?
I think so, yes, because what we want is different, I mean, when your parents met, they probably didn't think, oh, I want this person to be my true love and my
soulmate,
my confidant and my best friend and my my therapist and my, person who's I'm going to build my empire with and my co-parent and this and that. What we want from each other now is huge. We really have never wanted more from relationships than we do now.
Why? Why are we putting all of that on one person?
Yeah.
I mean, what's changed in society that that that's the norm?
There's been a big shift in our society, which is in previous generations, there was a lot of importance placed on simply being in a relationship, being married, being secure in that way, and having all of that. In our society today, we're very fortunate. We all kind of, to large, small or large degree, we make our money, we live our lives. We don't need financial security in the same way. And there has been this sort of shift away from the relationship and the family and the group to now a much more individualistic society, right? You just need to go online and everyone's got to live their best life. And you've got to have the most amazing experiences of your life. And that's great. And that's all exciting.
But personal happiness.
But there's a big, big shift. People will not settle. People will not, sacrifice or give 10 years to someone to pursue a relationship and see if it's going to work out. If people aren't happy, they leave relationships, they leave jobs, they leave countries. It's sort of our personal deep fulfillment has never been more important. And that is a big shift from previous generations where it was about stability, security, raising your kids, being there for families. It was a very different mindset now. And it's just different now. It's very exciting because we're living these big, exciting modern lives. But again, our relationships are struggling to find a space whereby they can exist. And then we can feel happy in our relationships because we want to feel happy. We want to feel very happy in our relationships at all times.
It's
and
a lot of pressure, though.
Yeah, it is a lot of pressure.
And not sustainable, I would have thought.
For sure. I mean, because what's the wisdom that your parents would no doubt share with us, right?
They are indeed wise.
Is, many times not feeling particularly happy, feeling annoyed, irritated, frustrated. I mean, they would laugh heartily, at us saying, oh, well, I get too frustrated with my partner, so I left them.
Yeah.
Welcome to marriage. And it's not to say, as I say, I don't want us to be miserable in our relationships. We have to be realistic about what it is to be human and what it is to share a life with someone.
Precisely. And I've always had this saying that anyone can run through a cornfield towards each other with rose petals falling from the sky. In other words, anybody can navigate the good times, but it's actually when the hard times hit or you're navigating difficulties.
That's it.
So
yeah.
Let's go back to attachment styles because you have written a book.
I have.
Tell me everything.
I can't quite believe it. I've written a book and it's coming out next February. It's available for pre-order on Amazon
I've already looked on Amazon. I must pre-order.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, what the book is about is it's sort of it approaches attachment, but it tells you what to do about it. So
Thank you.
The title literally is The Attachment Solution, because there's a lot of understanding around attachment and not always accurate, to be honest, stuff that's out there. So there's a lot of understanding of attachment. There's not a lot of understanding about we need to do the work to try to be more secure and to bring different aspects of ourselves to relationships, right?
Right.
So over the years, so many of my clients have said to me, it's all very well, Charisse, you saying that we've got this, that, and the other thing, but what are we going to do about it? And so it's great, so I've created a book, like I also have with my online Instagram community, where it's like, this is what you need to do to emotionally mature into being able to have adult relationships. Because when we're insecurely attached, we are coming from quite an injured part of ourselves, right? And then what that means is that we can be in our relationships for a little bit, but we can very quickly be triggered into some sort of survival mode, and that's fight or flight. So if you think about it, it's kind of anxious attachment can be quite fighty because we're fighting for the relationship. We're so desperate for it all the time. Let's do this. And then the avoidant can be quite flighty, and it's like, well, I'm out. This is all too much for me, or I just need some space, or, I'm leaving, or whatever. So the book really addresses, let's look at attachment and let's think about what to do about it, because we need to be more secure. We're very good at blaming others. We aren't so good at looking at ourselves and doing, the work that we need to do.
A couple of years ago, I read a book called Attachment, and it basically explained all my ex-boyfriends.
Right.
Which is not to say that I didn't look at myself.
Yes.
I'm coming across on all the tests that I've done and all the quizzes. I mean, they are online, so I don't know how accurate they are, but I'm coming across as secure.
Right.
I'm not in relationships very often.
Okay.
Get out the violin. But I when I'm in one, I seem quite chilled, quite laid back, quite secure, but I keep attracting avoidance. I'm praying none of my exes are watching this. God love them. They're absolutely delightful, but they are 100% avoidant.
Wow. Yeah.
So I suppose it used to be called commitment phobe. And what I like about attachment styles is it doesn't just put everything down to, oh, well, you're afraid of commitment.
For sure. Yes.
Which I really appreciate. But as a secure, why am I attracting avoidance and what can I do about it? Help, Charisse. I really need help.
Well, that's really interesting. I mean, my challenge to you would be, think about when you have an argument. Think about when you're angry. Think about when you're not happy.
I've got a real temper.
Okay, think about when you're in the mess of relationships, if you like, because as I say, that's when our insecure relating will sort of come out, because it is interesting that you keep attracting and being attracted to. Or do they? I
don't realise that they're avoidance. Sadly, they don't have a sign on the first date. Otherwise, I would run for the hills. It tends to come out between 3 and 6 months.
Yeah. Okay.
Because the honeymoon period is kind of the first 3 months. Okay, then you start to see a little bit more of the real them, and then they run.
For sure.
So
okay.
So it's definitely not a conscious thing.
No, it never is.
It's the opposite of what I'm actually looking for. So I need some help.
Okay. Well, I would say that you now have a lot of experience with people who may have some degree of avoidance, right?
Yes, too much.
So it's interesting that you can't recognize that at the beginning.
What questions should I be asking? How long are their relationships? Do they run at the first sign of trouble? What should I be asking?
Yeah, I mean, I think questions like, what happened in your last relationship? What did you learn from your last relationship? What would your dream relationship look like? Is a really good question, actually, because we can learn a lot about anyone from that. Because you can say, what would be, your dream weekend away with someone or whatever, because within that, you're going to reveal how you like being close to someone, how you like being in relationship with someone. So it could be, someone wants to go on picnics and sit in front of the fire and hold hands and have sex all weekend, or someone
great,
or someone might want to sort of go on hikes and have experiences and kind of do other things. And then within that, I think you've got your clues about who and how someone might relate. But I can tell when I meet someone if they are avoidant.
Can you?
And they may not even have to speak.
Oh.
And that's just because I've got a highly developed sort of radar for it. So that's what I'm suggesting to you. It's like, this isn't about categorizing people, because what you might find is that there may not be an answer to why you are attracting people with avoidance.
Okay.
But there is a way of relating to someone who is a bit avoidant in a way that either reduces their avoidance, so they're able to sort of step into the relationship a little bit more, or you can see you can see what's on offer that much quicker.
Yeah.
And then if you're not interested, you can sort of move on, right?
Oh, because how? Well, tell me everything.
Well, there are things, it is a relational dynamic, right? So it's two people are kind of creating it. So there's stuff, as you say, that we are really unconscious of that we are doing, right? And so that could be an interesting question, possibly an exercise for you if you wanted to, if you were in any way still friendly with your exes or anyone you've dated or anything like that. I know that isn't always the case. Maybe your friends, okay? Maybe ask some of your friends and just say, listen, how do you think I come across when I'm scared, when I'm angry? What do you think are maybe some of the things that I can work on that would allow me to be more approachable, be more open to communication, that you feel that you could come to me? I don't know if you have someone that you could have that sort of conversation with, because there's something important about how we are always reading each other, and people with an avoidant anything will always be looking. When you're on a date and when they're on a date, both of you will be looking at one another thinking, how do I feel safe with this person? And so depending on if we are secure or if we're anxious, we're wanting closeness. Relationship is about closeness. For an avoidant, relationship is about acceptance.
Okay.
Okay. And we generally, the last thing we can accept about people is their avoidance,
Because
right?
they keep running too
Right.
far.
Absolutely. And so again,
For you to say, it's okay, I accept you.
if it's that extreme, then there isn't a lot to work with for sure.
Okay.
But there is something about it is a very effective way of sort of managing difficult emotions, because relationships do bring difficult emotions. So I think there's just something interesting about noticing how extreme someone's avoidance is as and when you meet them, and you can ask them some questions to really establish that, as I suggested. And then also just think about how accepting you are able to be with that person, because that person is probably going to be hyper vigilant to feeling rejected. When we are avoidant, we come from a history of rejection, of not being good enough, right? So often this coping strategy around that is I'm going to leave before I disappoint someone, because I inevitably always do, right?
So, yeah.
That's the sort of mindset that they're coming from. Whereas if we're a bit anxious, or we are more secure, we're wanting closeness, we're wanting connection. And that can sort of sometimes feel overwhelming for someone with avoidance. And then they suddenly fear that they can't live up to this thing that we want from them. And that might be the case. They might be too, within themselves, they just are too wounded and there's just too much difficulty. Or they need some love and acceptance and care to actually reveal the person that is actually there, that they can be within a relationship. Because
so interesting
that, we move out of coping. Avoidance is a coping strategy. And so we want to create a relationship that they don't have to cope with. They can exist in and love, and then learn maybe how to be closer with people. So it is very, very difficult. I'm not suggesting that it's not. It is extremely difficult.
I mean, I don't know whether, because a couple of my exes revealed quite a difficult childhood.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
So it always seems to come from there. And one of them was fairly open about that. One of them wasn't so much. But it's almost like now I feel like if somebody reveals a difficult childhood, I should just run before I go out with them for 6 months and then they dump me.
Well, were they able to talk about their difficult childhood and how
one of them,
how that impacts how they have relationships, or how that's impacted them in their lives generally?
Yeah, one of them. But I think it's more, what have you done about that?
Yeah,
has it left a mark? How have you overcome that?
That's right.
I shall have to take a notepad on my next date with a whole list of 30 questions just to establish what attachment style they are.
But it is so sad, because people with avoidance also will be the people least likely to seek out therapy.
Oh, I mean, Charisse, from your mouth to God's ears, because isn't that the truth?
That's right.
My parting shot to one of my exes was, please go and get therapy.
Yeah.
Like, please go and see a doctor about something else, and please go and see a therapist, because the two are not mutually exclusive.
It's really difficult.
And I meant it. It might have come out a bit harsh, but actually it was meant very kindly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because, it's kind of, there are a lot of avoidant women out there, and there are a lot of avoidant men. And it's kind of very common in men, because it goes hand in hand with how boys are raised to not speak about their feelings, to man up, to shut up, to just do this. And so they are not raised to communicate. They're not raised to be gentle and kind and tender and sensitive and empathic. That's not, even to this day, that's not how little boys are raised, right? And then a woman like you and me and everyone else, we're wanting these emotionally connected relationships from these people, and they are unable to do that. So it is tragic, because it's kind of, and that's what I'm saying about there's a lack of self-awareness. So for someone with avoidance, they avoid looking at stuff. They don't want to, it's too overwhelming and kind of scared. And there's also this shield, this other defense, which is, I'm okay. I'm fine. I don't have big feelings. Why are you getting so upset? And calm down and all of that. So there is a lot to deal with. And this is why relationships do break down, because it's very, very painful. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed about writing in the book. I've got these huge chapters where I write down not just the traits of each attachment style, but the literal behaviors, like examples of paragraphs of this is what it looks like in your life. Because you can read a list of things and go, oh yeah, maybe that's me or whatever. But I'm actually saying these are traits that are going to have a directly negative impact on your relationship, right? Do you tranquilize your feelings? Do you run from relationships? Do you kind of always find fault with your partners? It's kind of, I've really broken it down because it's exactly that, because anyone is more likely to pick up a book and have a flick through a book than go to therapy and talk about their most difficult, intimate, sort of scary experiences, right? So that's what I mean when I talk about self-awareness. There's a lack of self-awareness in people, and particularly people who don't want that self-awareness because they're too scared to look at it. But actually, it's not that scary, and we can do it. And let's just move forward, because it would be best even for them, even though they feel fine. It would be so much more fulfilling for them as a person to have better relationships.
It's just so sad that all these people are, like you said earlier, it's not just within themselves, but they're affecting whoever they're dating, whoever they're with.
That's right. And there's only so much that we can do. It's like we can offer, love and care and acceptance, as I'm suggesting, but there does also need to be a limit, because that's the danger, is that we then become anxious in our way of relating, whereby we're just there being therapist and caregiver and caretaker and whatever, and that's not healthy either, because that doesn't actually make change, right? So it is really, really, really difficult. And I don't know if, as we get older, we get more secure. I think we get more fearful, we get more frustrated, we get more disillusioned. That's natural.
Yeah,
totally natural.
Oh God, there's no hope for me then at my age.
There definitely is. There's always hope.
Oh, thank you. So I was gonna ask, because I looked at some of your podcasts, which were really good, and you were saying that if you're attracting a certain type of person, it's often because there's a bit of that within you. But then I've read something else that said, if you're attracting, for example, avoidance, it's because they're the ones that are on the dating scene, because they've gone from relationship to relationship. Where do you sit on that? Is it that there's something within, or is it that they're just out there? You're going to bump into them.
I think from my perspective is that we are familiar with avoidance on some level. So when we were younger, one of our parents may have had a degree of avoidance, or our father might have worked away for work, or our mother.
That's very common.
Right, very, very common. My mother worked throughout my entire childhood. She was not a stay-at-home mother. She was working, she was busy, she was traveling.
Yeah.
That happens. Parents divorce, right? We have siblings that come along that take the attention, right? So
very dare they.
It doesn't, exactly. It doesn't have to be some, traumatic, sad tale, although many of us have those. There's just, when we are little, we have a lot of need, right? A lot of need. And, a lot of demands. And, we're not living life the way that we used to in villages where there were multiple people looking after our needs and we were all fine and safe all the time. We're living in small flats and apartments with, one or two people looking after us, if we are lucky.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of needs that are constantly going unmet. And what that does is that makes us familiar with avoidance. It makes us familiar with not getting our needs met, feeling people can't be there for us. And so that is in us. And so even if we become a little bit anxious or anything as a result, we are familiar with that.
And we seek the familiar.
Because especially if it's from a caregiver, which almost certainly it always is, those caregivers are our very, very first love affairs. Those are our love objects. They imprint in us what we want, what we will find attractive, what we will attract, and how we will behave. So the relationship that our caregivers have with each other, and then the relationship that they have with us. Those are the biggest things that sort of inform us. And those are going to be human, because we're all human and we've all got our stuff, right?
Yeah.
So this thing of, attracting avoidance, or attracting people who are anxious or fearful, avoidant, or whatever it might be, it's because we probably have experience of it, because we've all got, this is something I talk about in the book. We've all got a little bit of everything in us.
Interesting.
Right.
Okay.
So if I'm angry with someone, depending on the relationship I have with that person, I could get really anxious and feel a bit worried and scared and, oh my God, this might be a problem. Or I might get angry with someone else and I'm like, excuse me, what do you think? And I can actually take a stronger position based on that relationship. So I can be anxious with one person, I can be avoidant with another, I can be a mixture with someone else. Or if I'm going through a depressive period of my life and life is struggling, how I'm going to relate to people is going to be different. Or if I'm flying high and doing really great and feeling really successful, how I relate is always going to sort of change. And what's going on within in the relationship is going to change. And that's what's interesting as a therapist to observe, is meeting a couple or people in relationships. And, they're starting out in their relationship, then someone loses their job, or someone gets pregnant, or they're going to try for a baby, or someone's sister dies, or, stress happens, life happens. And then suddenly we feel a bit more needy, or we feel like we need a bit more space, or we just shut down completely.
Yeah,
and
that's what happened.
right?
Like my very first relationship. And again, lovely bloke, but his father died.
Right. Oh, well, that's
And
major.
he became a completely different person.
Yeah.
And I mean, drugs and
wow, you're right. Yeah.
partying, and it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
He was totally different, and he related to me in a completely different way. So I think I learned very early on that relationships aren't stable, because something can happen in life.
That's
One thing
right.
can happen and the whole thing's over.
That's excellent. That's absolutely right, because we're always learning, and it's tragic, really, because as humans, all we really crave is consistency.
Oh, amen to that.
And that's just not the world that we live in now. And as humans, we aren't like that. So it's like, unless that is like locked in us, like so young, so conclusively. And, if anyone experienced that, lucky you, because,
Absolutely.
I don't really know many people who have, unless that is so locked into your nervous system that you're pretty much unshakable. We're out in this world today, and we can get knocked very easily. We can have relationships. And then we're learning like, oh, I thought this relationship was going to go that way. And that totally didn't happen. I can't trust my choices. I can't trust how I think. I can't trust other people.
Yeah.
And then it just starts, and then it grows and grows. We have more relationships, more difficult experiences.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, because
absolutely.
each one...
And then we choose the same kind of person.
Yeah.
Or, and it's just, it's really, really painful. So to be really awake to what we're doing and trying to do things differently and try to be there for ourselves, it's really, really hard. It's a lot of hard work. And we're not used to doing that in our relationships. In the past, people could have multiple relationships, but not really in the way that we're having now. It is very, very difficult, because our nervous systems, secure attachment is basically having a relationship with a deactivated nervous system all the time.
What? Is
okay,
that possible?
maybe not all the time, but when we are anxious, when we are avoidant, our nervous system is activated. Right. We're either hyper or hypo, right?
Okay.
And so we're in this survival mode. It's only when we can be at rest with one another, right? The nervous system deactivated the vast majority of the time. That's when we can love, right? When we're activated, we're in fear. We're not in love, we're in fear. So we're going to be avoidant. We're going to be anxious to cope with the fear. It's only when we deactivate the nervous system can we truly do that. And then what I'm saying is that life is so stressful.
How does your system ever get deactivated?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're sort of, in a way, creating a world where it is very, very difficult to do that in any way. Have a deactivated nervous system, raising our children, having relationships, doing our jobs. It is a problem.
So percentage-wise, do you know the 4 different types, what the percentage is of the sort of general population? Is that something you could answer?
Absolutely. I mean, there are mixed research results.
Okay.
But by and large, we say that there's about 30 to 35% people are anxiously attached.
Okay.
And then about 30% are avoidantly attached, right?
Okay, that's lower than I was expecting.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. And then
Makes me feel better.
supposedly the rest are secure. So that's what I find a little bit sort of interesting, because
you've not met any.
because there aren't that many people that are truly secure out there, for sure. But I guess, the quality of our relationships is really kind of what matters. This isn't about being perfect people, because God knows none of us will ever be perfect, right? But it is just about, I guess, recognizing that you can have calm and compatibility in a relationship. And I think that's where those secure things do.
And in a mixed relationship as well. So if the two if an avoidant is with an anxious, can that work? How does that work?
Absolutely. I mean, two things can happen there, okay? One has a happy ending and one doesn't have a happy
tell me
ending,
both.
right? Okay. So if we are secure, or the other person is secure, and then the other person isn't, and vice versa, then there's a golden opportunity there that we can learn to be more secure, because we've got, half the equation secure. Really bringing that, if you try to argue with a secure person, it's quite difficult to get any traction with them, because they'll be like, "Oh, okay. Oh, I didn't realize you felt like that." And, "Oh, I
So sorry
see."
about
Or
that.
they might be a bit annoyed, and then it's been like, "Yeah, you're right." Whatever. It's like there's, there isn't this fire that needs to exert itself the whole time.
Right.
If you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's difficult to get traction. They're very trustworthy. They're very simple, and they're very consistent. Right. So that, in a way, is a golden opportunity, because we can rewire our attachment system. And suddenly we're like, because what we're getting reflected back is trust, is consistency, and our behavior isn't really getting the traction and the heightened, nervous system, and maybe some of the sort of chemicals, but we're getting like, oh, okay, I don't need to do all of that. And it's all just kind of chill and cool and okay. And over time, we can learn that. And then we can become more secure in how we relate, which is obviously what we really want, right? So that's like the best thing that can happen.
Okay.
What is negative that can happen is that the person with the insecure attachment is so insecure, and the relationship then becomes a bit destabilized as a result. And then the person that was secure suddenly is like, I don't understand what's going on here. I don't have the tools to navigate this. And so you start using the tools that you have, which are quite secure, but they're insufficient for what's going on. And then after a period of time, the secure person will become a bit more insecure.
And what about an insecure person with an avoidant? How, because one of them's going, I need you, and the other's going, go away, I need space. How does that work?
Absolutely. So that would be the anxious and the avoidant,
yeah, how does
right?
that work?
Which is across the board the most popular pairing.
Is it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder the whole
to the point where we've got this,
gone crazy.
We have this phrase for it, which is the anxious avoidant dance.
Oh, so I come closer, you go back.
That's it.
I see
one
where
foot in, 1 foot out.
They're literally waltzing.
Right.
I can see where you're coming from.
That's right. But that's really interesting, because initially there's a lot of chemistry that bring these people together.
Okay.
So there's a lot of fun, there's a lot of great sex, and it's all kind of good at the beginning. And there's something actually very interesting just about men and women here. And I know this doesn't relate to everyone, but there is a lot of really interesting, compelling research that shows that men's testosterone level decreases when they fall in love in order to bond with their partner.
Goodness.
And then when we move out of that falling in love phase, and it's just, life is normal, their testosterone increases again. And then that's why there's a sense of like, oh, this loving, empathic person at the beginning has now changed into someone that's a little bit more aloof and doing their own thing. And that is because of a literal hormone change in men, right?
Hormones, they're responsible for everything.
It is fascinating. But if you think about it, millennia ago, we just needed to bond, and we would bond. So we just lower testosterone, bond, impregnate, procreate, keep everyone going. And now it's sort of the same but different. So there is this dance that kind of happens that is really, really important. And at the beginning, it's very exciting. And then at some stage, one or both, the anxiously attached person will just be wanting more, and, the consistency or whatever. And the avoidant will begin to fatigue. Right. This is too much intensity over too much time. And they just need a little bit of time away. But that will then trigger the person with anxiety and then think, no, what's going on? And so they'll do a bit of pursuing. It's also known as the distancer pursuer dynamic, right?
That makes sense.
So they will then begin to pursue, and then the other person will sort of distance. So that is a dance. And then eventually the person with anxious attachment will get fed up and feel annoyed, and then take a step out of the dynamic themselves. And then that is when the person with avoidance will go, oh, where are they going?
Yeah.
And then they step in.
Right.
And that's the dance. So it's the anxious stepping in, and then the avoidance stepping back. And then after a period of time, eventually the anxious will step back, and then that will allow the avoidance to step in. So that's what I'm saying about this thing about just recognizing.
And are those the people that make up and break up, and it's all,
they can. They can.
Quite combustible and...
in extreme, that would be more of the sort of fearful,
okay.
avoidant dynamic there, whatever. But absolutely, the anxious and avoidant will absolutely break up because they were so sort of unhappy within a relationship and get back together again or whatever. But it's interesting what is often, I think, occurs in these relationships is that they don't actually want to leave each other, and they don't. So this whole anxious avoidant dance is just an ongoing state of their relationship.
But that's not necessarily healthy, is it? If it makes them happy, then...
No, they're both equally unhappy, I think. That's the reality. So that's what I'm saying about the quality of our relationships. We can't, it's just, but there's something familiar. If you were brought up with parents who did that, then that is your understanding of what love is and what relationships are, right? So that's then what you will do. You know, you're not going to think, oh, this isn't right. I mean, you probably will think this isn't right and I hate this and whatever, but there's also deep in your biology, you know, a sense of, no, this is how it is. And that's okay.
You were talking earlier about the fact that the attachment styles come out particularly in an argument or where when you're angry. So anger within relationships and the different ways people have of dealing with anger. Could you just go into that a bit for me?
Definitely. I think this is really interesting because we'll all recognize ourselves in this, right? You know, so anger is fascinating because we all have such a subjective view of what anger means and how okay it is and whether we feel safe expressing anger and if we don't, right? And that's what I see when I'm working with clients when they are arguing or there's an issue. You can see people who are comfortable with anger and people who are not comfortable with anger and sort of how we deal with it. But it's really, really fascinating because there are 4 behaviors that we do when it comes to anger in terms of how we deal with anger, right? Okay. The first one is we escalate. Right? We all know this one. So we're arguing, you know, we're having conflict, and rather than, you know, calming everything down, what do? We throw logs on the fire, we escalate it, right? We double down, don't we? And we really go to town, okay? And, you know, it's very human. I do it, you do it, everyone does it, right? Okay. But it really, really isn't helpful because, again, it's keeping the nervous system activated, and not just activated, but it's like pushing it and pushing it and pushing it, taking us to extreme. And that's the last thing we want to be doing in our precious, tender, you know, intimate relationships that are really quite fragile, actually. And, you know, and when we are triggered, you know, when we're in fight or flight, empathy goes out the window. Compassion, you know, forget about it. You know, that is not part of what we're doing. We're actually in a I'm going to kill you kind of state of mind, right? And I mean, and I've witnessed that many ways, right? So you know, a small argument can become, you know, the stakes can get very high very, very quickly. Yeah. So you can ask yourself, like, am I an escalator? Do I know that that's sort of something that I do, that when I'm unhappy, when I'm hurt, when do I really pour more fuel on the fire, right? So there's the escalator. Then there's another thing that we do, which is we invalidate, right? We invalidate each other. So when we're arguing, when we're having a disagreement, we say things like, "That's not true.
Yeah, you're wrong. You're an idiot.
That's absolutely wrong." Or even, "You're lying. That didn't happen." You know, or, "Why are you saying that?" And you know, or like, "That is ridiculous. You know, why would you think that?" Right? Okay.
Which, you do that really well, by the way. I can tell you've heard that a few times.
I have. Yeah. And we can pull, we can pull faces, roll our eyes, tone of voice, scathing, sarcasm, all of that, right, comes in.
Okay.
So, you and I sitting here calmly today discussing it, we can think, God, that really isn't helpful. But,
but when you're in it,
this behavior just comes out, right? And a lot of it is so unthinking. You know, there's a thoughtlessness to our behavior, you know, especially when we are so triggered and we really feel justified now to be coming out, you know, come out fighting.
Yeah.
So the invalidation is really important. I would say this is one of the main problems that we face in our relationships, which is only me and my perspective and the way I see things is possible right now. Right? And then you get everyone, and then everyone thinks that. And it's like, okay, and now we're going to try to understand each other or not. You know, it's kind of, we get very fixed in our position. Right. And just because someone else's experience, someone else's perspective isn't something that we can relate to or even understand sometimes, we will then completely disregard it and we will invalidate it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of puts a big wedge in between people, because relationships are about closeness, but it's also a lot about acceptance. We really want to be seen by our partners. We want to be heard, and we would love to be understood. And
Yes.
I sort of say, look, we can't always be understood, but we can strive to understand. And when we are invalidating our partners, we're basically saying, I don't understand you, and I don't want to understand you. And I'm also maybe going to judge you and say, whatever you're telling me is rubbish or is silly or I don't like it or I'm going to shut you down, right? Which is really painful when often we're arguing about things that matter to us, right? I mean, obviously we can have petty arguments about nothing.
Yeah.
But sometimes, there are big, important things that need to be discussed. And it's almost like the more sensitive the subject, the more likely we are to do these behaviors. So we need to be very careful because we trample over one another's feelings. And we actually almost create more problems as we go. It's like you start off with one problem and then you escalate and then you invalidate and then you've suddenly got 3 more problems, So
we're in that last argument when you didn't listen to me.
That's absolutely right. So, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot here in terms of what we're actually trying to achieve, right? So then there's also we withdraw.
Okay.
Some people, when we get angry, we can't handle it and we withdraw. And we can withdraw angrily with rage and fury and slam doors and storm out and, do all of that. Or we can just shut down.
Yeah.
Suddenly the shutters come down and we're out. We emotionally leave because it's just too much for us, right? So we would sort of withdraw. And then then the other person often wanting to connect, wanting to be close, really struggles with that because suddenly you've got the brick wall that you're dealing with.
So were they
right?
the people that sometimes heard people saying, oh, he's really moody or she's really moody, but what they really mean is
maybe
they've emotionally closed down.
Maybe, absolutely. Because in a way, it's like people can escalate and people can continue to escalate and escalate. But for some people, at some point, they will shut down.
Yeah.
They will need to withdraw. And they can do that in person, like in the room, or they can physically withdraw as well. So there's an emotional or a physical component to that. And then the conversation just kind of stops. And that's very different to what I recommend for people, which is take a time out.
Right. Okay? Oh, how is that different?
Well, one is like an intentional, hopefully relatively loving act.
Okay.
The other one is a complete and utter coping strategy that sort of rejects your partner. Right. So sort of withdrawing. There's also another great word that we use for this, which is stonewalling.
Oh, I love it.
Right. Where you're just like stone and there's this wall, obviously. And so there's nothing there. When I say take a time out, I'm like, everyone calm down. Right. We're going to take a time out. Everyone go and breathe for like 5 minutes and then come back. That's very different to stonewalling. I'm not saying go and stonewall for 5 minutes. I'm saying get back in touch with yourself, calm yourself down. Stonewalling is when we are completely disconnected from ourselves, right? And we are not engaging anymore, right? So those are two different. God, I'm just slightly worried now. I can't remember the fourth. So there's escalating, invalidating, withdrawing, and then we've got the fourth one, which is we negatively interpret.
Right.
Okay, so our partner says something and we will hear it in a negative way.
It's the big bum, does my bum look big in this argument?
Right, okay, yeah, maybe. Or like the partner just says, oh, well, that's not what you said. You say, what are you saying? You weren't listening to me yesterday.
You never listened to me.
That's right. It's kind of, we're in that state now where we are expecting to be hurt. We're expecting disappointment. We're expecting our partner to let us down. So whatever they say, we're going to interpret it negatively. So if they say, oh, well, do you want me to get you a glass of water or something or a cup of tea? We're like, well, I can do that myself.
Well, why didn't you get me a coffee? You know I don't like to.
Right, that's it.
I'm quite good at this. I should just argue more.
Well, it's such human nature, isn't it? When you stop and think about it, it's like, wow, that is really what we sort of do. And
so true.
And that can also speak of our pain. When we're arguing with someone, we're already in a heightened state. But then we can also show our wounds. Like, we expect to be put down. We expect to be hurt. And we expect people to think badly of us or put us down or be disrespectful. That one is sort of quite a important one to sort of recognize, because in a way what we are doing is we are reinforcing our partner's sort of negative ways of relating, which is what we don't want to do. And we are reinforcing our own narrative, right? We're just taking the same old stuff and making it appear a certain way when it isn't always the case. Sometimes it is the case. Our partners are saying very, very negative things, but we can get into a mindset where we interpret everything through a negative lens, and that is a big, big problem. So those are all ways of dealing with anger, but also how we deal with disagreements in our relationships. And those are traps. Those are traps that we can fall into, right?
They are.
So it's really good to try to avoid those traps. And obviously our attachment styles might speak of those different behaviors, right?
And your upbringing, because like you said before.
Correct, yeah.
So in my family, we were very comfortable with shouting.
Right.
Because my dad is what we jokingly called an exploder.
Right, okay.
So probably the first one you mentioned.
Definitely.
I have definitely inherited that, but it's usually over things like my computer not working, my phone not working. It's usually over technology.
Okay.
Not so much with people.
Okay.
Maybe I'm just saying that to make myself feel better. But my dad would explode over the most ridiculous things. The most memorable one being he hated sticky door handles. I know it's ridiculous.
Wow.
And obviously when you're little and you've got little sticky fingers.
Right.
So once for a joke, we went round and put honey on every single door.
I'm sure he found that hilarious.
He actually found it hilarious.
Oh, did
and that was the way we discovered to diffuse his very quick temper was if we laugh.
We bring some humor.
If we bring some humor, he would be doubled over laughing.
Yeah.
And he would absolutely agree with this. When he watches this, he'll probably laugh as well. But my brother would take the mickey out of his Scottish accent.
Right.
As soon as my dad got angry, my brother would laugh at him. And then that was just the way of dealing with my dad. And then the temper would completely go and it was all fine. So in our family, somebody shouting wasn't a scary thing.
Yeah.
But you can really see, I suppose, the people for whom anybody raising their voice is just terrifying.
That's correct. And that is often the case. I see that all the time in my consulting room. You know, we get heightened, we're upset, we're talking, you know, because there's feeling behind it. And someone will say, stop shouting. Or
but it's not that easy.
Why are you shouting? But the person's not shouting.
Right. Wow. Really?
Yeah. It's kind of, you can watch any reality TV show and you'll see this as well. Like
I wasn't actually shouting.
Stop shouting at me. And you can hear it in the way we tell stories as well. They were like, and the next thing you know, she's shouting at me, telling me this and that. It's like, she probably wasn't shouting.
To be fair.
She was probably, maybe she did have a slightly raised voice, or maybe she was just talking strongly or kind of whatever. Yeah. But what you're saying is absolutely right. You know, for some people, a raised voice is just like, oh dear, well, I'm familiar with that. Yeah. And for other people who were raised to, don't you raise your voice at me, and we don't do that around here and all of that. And then suddenly you're having an animated conversation with your partner, and they get like triggered. They're like, oh my God, this is abusive, or this is too much. And it's like, okay, we need to be careful here and just recognize we're coming from different understandings of how anger is expressed.
And it's really interesting. You talked about the negative spin on things. So
yes,
one of my family members, again, he's a bit like me. He will shout to let off steam.
Right. Yes.
But his partner will often read that incredibly negatively, as though he was shouting at her. Well, she was in the same room as him, and obviously he might have been directing it towards her, but actually it was about the fact that the iron's broken, or nobody took the bins out, but she'll interpret it so personally. And I come along and go, actually, he was really just letting off steam, because that's what we do in our family.
Yeah.
We're very much of the attitude it's better out than in.
That's right.
But I'm aware that plenty of people were not raised like that. It must be terrifying.
For sure. Or they were raised where it wasn't kind of okay and it was really, dysfunctional. So it is really difficult. But being able to have that conversation, I mean, I think that's such a great example that you give. And what I always say to my clients is ask each other, what do you get like when you're angry? And also, what do you need?
And what do you need?
Because someone can just say, listen, I just need to let off steam for 2 minutes. And then honestly, I'll get over it. And I will work on trying to reduce that, because I know it's difficult for you and it's unpleasant for you to be around or whatever. And then, and the other person can say, okay, and I need to work on tolerating that a little bit more, and maybe speaking up for myself a bit more even, and having a bit more of a voice, because it's sort of okay occasionally to get angry.
Yeah.
We are humans. We will get angry. It doesn't have to become, a major problem within the relationship. So I think those kind of conversations are really important because we're stuck in our own past of that's not okay and we shouldn't be doing that, or this is fine and I have every right to do that. And both of those can just be questioned within this new relationship about how you both want things to be.
That's so fascinating. The other thing I was going to say is, so I'm a psychometric profiler, and I used to run a lot of courses with my dad, who got me into the business. And one of the things we talk about is, for example, an exploder. It's really your chemicals.
Yeah.
We used to call it the drunk monkey.
Yeah.
It's like a monkey is running rampant across your brain, and you're not capable. I don't think you're capable of rational thought because it's just chemicals and hormones and craziness.
That's right.
So what advice do you give when people have lost their temper and they really are going three hammers at each other?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the answer for so much stuff within our relationships is actually emotional regulation.
Oh, how?
Because we can have too much emotion and become angry, as you say, or we can become overly anxious. And this is also when we then over-explain, write long paragraphs and texts, right?
Yeah.
This is when, we are so full of emotion. Our emotions are in control. We are not in control. Our emotions are in control, right? Or on the other hand, we can shut down, like I've said before. We can detach, we can numb out, we can dissociate even, or we can get very high and mighty, self-righteous. There's so many things as humans that we do, and those are all emotion-led behaviors, right? And because we are so full of emotion, there's this sense of sort of entitlement that we can do what we want and say what we want or kind of whatever. And it's like, actually, we can't. It's our job to manage our emotions as well as possible. We need to be in control of our emotions, not them in control of us. And of course, there'll be times when we are anxious or we are angry or kind of whatever, but it's down to us to emotionally regulate during those times. And that's the most important thing, because what I'm saying is that it's about having a deactivated nervous system. And when we are angry, when we're furious or when we're shutting down or whatever, we do not have a deactivated nervous system. We have a very much activated nervous system, right? And that's when we can do destructive behavior potentially. We can have terrible arguments and we can do really, really not great behaviors, right? So emotional regulation techniques, there are many out there. I cover many of them in the book, but it's also, it's just about really, it's simple things like breath work. But then it's also about really looking at how we are thinking, because our brain is really going to have some distorted thoughts, extreme thoughts, and negative thoughts, right? All of those things, right? And so if we can begin to recognize what's happening in our physiology when we're getting overwrought, right? What we're thinking in our brains, we can either catch ourselves before we lose control, ideally, but we can definitely see when we have lost control.
Right.
So there's this great saying in the 12 steps that I learned when I worked in rehabs, which is, you aren't responsible for your first reaction.
Okay.
You are responsible for your second.
Okay. I like that.
Right? So you've got your initial and but then you got to be like, oh, I need to be careful, because if you were in,
that's the bit I'm missing.
If you were in a meeting with your boss or the prime minister or something, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to rein it in, right? So it's like, we all are going to have our split second automatic unconscious response, and then we can observe that response in ourselves, and then be like, okay, I need to do something here. I need to catch myself. I need to calm myself down.
How much practice does that take?
It takes a huge amount of practice.
How long?
It takes a huge amount of practice. A huge amount of practice. And it's also at times when we really don't want to do it, right? We like being high and mighty or self-righteous, or we like shutting down and feeling powerful. In a way, emotional regulation invites us to kind of stay in the mess and to sort of figure it out human to human, as calm as we can be, having these sensitive conversations without going into the survival mode of either fight or flight, right? So it is extremely difficult because we don't want to do that. It's the animal in us will go into survival.
Yep.
And the emotions that we're feeling, they're quite compelling, we don't want to stop them. But, when we're in enough pain, that is when we change, right? And so it's kind of, I think, we have to take responsibility as much as we can.
Okay. And you said something earlier when you were giving a funny example, and you were like, you never do this, and I always do. Do you? What's that called? I think you mentioned it in one of your podcasts. That very catastrophic.
Yeah.
Is it catastrophic, or is it the?
It's called overgeneralizing.
Yes,
right.
That's it.
It's kind of
We all do it.
Yeah, we all do it. It's like you've never been there for me. You never do this. Whatever. It's like, here, hold on, wait.
Hang a minute. Only
That's
yesterday I did that.
Yeah, exactly. You always do this. You always keep me waiting. And it's like, and we just. Language is very interesting in this way because it does reveal, again, what I'm saying, this extreme negative cognitions that we have, right? We don't want to be living in the extremes in any way. And so to say to someone, you always do that or you never do that, it's really reductive because humans are way more than that. But it also shows, I guess, in a way, what we're tuning into in our relationships, what we see, right? Yeah. I see when you do something wrong. And I'm going to make a big deal out of it. And I possibly won't even say anything at all.
Yeah, when you do something right.
When you do something right. So again, it's this interesting thing. And if we're in a relationship that's struggling, let me tell you, you're going to notice those negative things 10 times more than you're going to notice the positives, right? And you're going to focus on them. You're going to point them out. And in a way, we're just, we're reinforcing and perpetuating the problem, right? So that's why, what we're thinking and our perspective and our mindset is very important. This comes back a little bit to this sort of individualistic society where we're really focused on what we ourselves want and our own wants and wishes. And that means that when our relationship is struggling, we're going to move away from problem solving, from empathy, from compassion, from kindness into defensiveness, retaliation, punishment. Right? All these things, not good. It's not gonna magic away your problems. It's gonna make them even more entrenched. So there's something about becoming more conscious of our behavior, of what are we doing? Is that part of the problem or is it part of the solution? Because often it's part of the problem. And when a couple or people come to see me, they are just full of problem. There's only problem. And the way of dealing with it is a problem.
Yeah. And
it's like we have to, again, just move our perspective to something that's more solution-based, that's about kindness, it's about love, Is this loving what's going on between you guys here? You're in a love relationship. I don't see any love. Where is it? So
wow, that's quite a hard-hitting question.
Yeah. Because people say, well, I love them, but they're driving me mad. Right? And I'm like, okay, well, let's focus on the love.
Yeah.
Let's think about that. How is that being demonstrated in your relationship? How do you embody that? What was the most loving thing that you did yesterday? It's confronting.
I bet that makes people think.
It is. It does. And it's kind of because that's the shift that we need to do. If you ask people about their values, they'll talk about, I want to be loving. I want to be honest. I want peace. It's like, okay, let's bring that into your relationship.
Yeah. So are you demonstrating that in your relationship?
Yeah. Are you living by your values right now of being open-hearted or kind or generous? And that's where we have to move out of the activated, the nervous system that's activated, and then we're being an animal, into the deactivated calm of being a human. Because the human has a lot more tools actually than the animal. The animal have very limited tools. As a human, we've got a lot of tools and we can keep developing them in terms of listening or problem solving and ways of communicating and physical touch and closeness. There's endless possibilities there, but we don't spend enough time there. So that's my whole thing, is that we want to spend more time in this loving space where we've got deactivated nervous systems and we can be more secure with each other.
Absolutely. So I've got such a funny question, but it's almost like I want to ask your husband.
Oh, yes.
So I'd love to know what it's like to go out with a therapist. Do you analyze yourself constantly? Do you analyze your relationship a lot?
Oh, God.
Or is that something that you leave for the...
Oh, no. That's impossible.
It sounds like it would be a very enlightening relationship to be going out with a therapist.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where I'm going wrong. I need a therapist.
I don't know. Yeah. I mean, I think my husband very sweetly would say it's been amazing to be with a therapist. Ooh. And but it's kind of, that's what I love about my relationship, is that I can learn from someone and someone can learn from me, right?
Absolutely.
There's nothing about I've come into this relationship and I know all the answers.
Yeah.
I mean, if only, that's hilarious. But I guess what I have, which is what we're taught as therapists to have, is I've got the art of observing what's going on.
And the tools that you've been talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that's it.
If you're not practicing them and living them,
That's
it may be
it.
difficult to recommend them to other people, but you're actually living and breathing them.
That's what I feel my value is as a therapist. When I'm telling people to do stuff, when I'm telling you to do stuff, trust me when I say I have been down that road a million times, and I have had to do the excruciating work of figuring out how to emotionally regulate when I'm literally ready to sort of like scale a wall or something, right? So I think coming from that experience, so much of my personal life has informed my professional life. Yes, all the research that's out there and all my work with clients, amazing, incredible. But it's my personal life where I've been in the trenches, if you like.
Oh, yeah.
That's where I've really learned, and I've learned about relationships 100%.
And that must be why you're so popular on Instagram as well, because it's that personal, if you've got an amazing following, you're definitely an influencer, and people must resonate with your story.
I think so. And a lot of people say that I have quite an unusual angle, which, I mean, for me isn't really unusual at all. But my angle is work on your relationships. If things aren't, if it's abusive, if it's dysfunctional, if someone is clearly showing you that this is what is on offer with this person and you don't like it, you do need to go. But my other thing, but my thing when I'm working with someone, if you're with someone and you want to make it work and you want love in your life, start now, because it's a long journey. Love is a slow art. We've got to learn how to do it. So kind of stay and do the work. Whereas a lot of the messaging in our relationships now is you deserve better. Go find someone who's going to meet all your needs every day, every moment. And that's it. And it's kind of, I just don't feel like that's realistic and that's fair to one another as humans.
There's certain buzzwords as well. I remember I was doing a job a couple of weeks ago, and I think 4 separate girls mentioned that their partners or ex-partners were narcissists.
Yeah.
And I was like, are they narcissists or are they just assholes?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There'll be a buzzword, everybody will read about it, and everyone will be like, that's my ex. And actually half the time, are they just,
Yeah.
Yeah,
I agree.
What would be your take on that?
I mean, it's a huge problem in the psychotherapy and psychological field right now, is that people are just labeling other people, particularly sort of narcissism, or NPD as we would call it, narcissistic personality disorder, which is such a rare and severe diagnosis.
I'm glad to hear it.
Anyone, And
Phew.
I think we live in a more narcissistic world for sure.
Yes,
and people are very narcissistic. I suppose I would argue that we all are to some degree. Actually,
if you're on social media, I guess
absolutely,
you kind of have to be.
Absolutely, but there is definitely this thing of kind of victimizing ourselves almost and calling other people narcissists and stuff like that, which isn't really helpful because it's not helping people educate themselves about what that's all about.
A bit like a little bit of knowledge
isn't necessarily a good thing. And it's like when I was studying psychology, my colleagues and I, we would just sort of open up the DSM, which is like the sort of dictionary of all the diagnoses that you have. And we sort of go like that and like choose one. And we'd all read and we'd all laugh about how much we identify with all like the symptoms and characteristics or whatever. So, yeah.
So, Charisse, you've mentioned the word love a lot. So what is love?
Yeah.
What is it?
Well, I would say that is a very individual and sort of subjective thing to discuss. And I love discussing it with my clients.
Okay.
And I really I love exploring that, because I definitely believe in this thing of being loving, right?
Okay.
So for me, love is an action. And this is something that I will challenge my clients with around what would be the loving thing to do here? If we were to let love guide us, what would we do? Or this is sounding a lot like rage. Shall we try to bring in some love? Right? Because it becomes forgotten. This thing that we all want so much and really fulfills us as humans so much, it just gets forgotten about completely. And we will instead fixate on the anger and the hurt and the disappointment and the and the fear. That is really, really the top one. And I'm not saying those things don't matter. They really, really do. But if you keep staring at all of that, that's all you're going to see. And it's kind of, if we are here to try to create a love story, then we need to think about what love is and how we are acting out love in our lives. So, if we have a partner or family or children or friends, the focus for me should be on how to be loving. And we can have those kind of amazing conversations with our partners. And I do this all the time in my consulting room, which is getting people to say to one another what what feels really loving for them. So you can have one person to say, I feel when you just hear me out and let me speak and don't interrupt and don't tell me what to do, I feel really loved. And then someone else can say, look, I know you're not an affectionate person, but when you hold my hand, when we watch, stuff every night, that means so much to me. I feel really loved. That's very loving for me, right? And then we sort of cut through a lot of the noise of our narratives and our past and our fears and our projections into, do I want to devote some headspace and time and effort into doing something loving or thinking about love or embodying love? Or do I just want to keep focusing on all this problem and noise and everything else? Because love is really going to guide us to grow as humans and grow within our partnerships. So love for me is a very alive, active component to our relationships that gets lost really quite quickly. So it's a conversation that I have with my clients.
Wow. I think it makes perfect sense to me. We all need to spread more love in the world. Well,
absolutely. And we need to know ourselves and know what is the love that I want.
Yeah.
And
what does it mean to me?
And how can I love my partner a little bit more, maybe in ways that I wouldn't consider to be particularly loving, but they really do. And wow, that is, if that isn't love, I don't know what is.
Well, just speaking to you, I feel much more warm and fuzzy.
There you go.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you. Me too.
Excellent. And take care. Thank you again.
No problem.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Please do join us on social media. On TikTok, it's the No Filter Zone. And on Instagram, it's azio.beauty. And look out for the next episode coming soon.